Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Hey, welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. This is the finest Bible bistro on the internet. Come on in. We've got artisanal Bible study waiting just for you. 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, studying the Psalms verse by verse. You can find extra content, my translation of the Psalms, on my-dailydose.com. Please go there and check it out. We're looking today at verse 5, and just verse 5. And verse 5 is a transition spot for this psalm. The psalm is nicely divided between the first 4 verses and the last 4 verses. So we have verses 1 through 4, and we have a Selah that divides 2 and 3, and then we have a Selah that divides 4 and 5. But there's something else that happens here in these verses. In the first 4 verses, we have a word that's repeated that's very important to the first half of the psalm, and that is the word call, the word that I have translated call. When I call, answer me. That's the very first line in verse 1. And the last line in verse 3 is, the Lord will hear when I call to him. So you hear this theology of prayer being expressed by the psalmist. I'm going to pray. Lord, hear me when I pray. The Lord will hear me when I pray. The hearing and the calling work hand in hand together. The Lord is hearing the call that is being made by the psalmist. But that word call is real important. Also, the word hear also in that section 2 different times. In the second half of the psalm, verses 5 through 8, we have a different word that's focused on, and that is the word for trust. And we have it here in verse 5. Allow me to read for you today my translation. Offer sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. So we begin now the second section of this particular psalm with the idea of trust. And trust is going to be an important idea throughout the remainder of this psalm. So I'm going to trust in the Lord, but why am I doing that? It's because I've called on him. So once I've called on him, I've put my eggs in that basket. He becomes my help. I'm looking to him for my relief. Distress has enlarged itself against me. I need him to be gracious to me, so I've called on him. Therefore, I'm putting my trust in him. And in verse 5 of Psalm 4, we have offer sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. My trust in the Lord is a sacrifice of righteousness. My prayer to the Lord is a sacrifice of righteousness. My meditation on my bed in silence is a sacrifice of righteousness. And you see why the Selah comes in here after verse 4, because we have silence now being magnified. That last word is on your bed and be silent, Selah. So now we're going to be quiet. And now this quietness leads us to a recognition of my offering of righteousness. Offer sacrifices of righteousness. He's not talking about going to the slaughter site and taking a lamb. No, this is something that's done in the heart. David's glory is the Lord. He's sacrificing to the Lord with his prayers, with his trust, with his meditation. All of that, ladies and gentlemen, is what the psalmist is teaching us. And this idea of trust. Trust in who? Trust in the Lord. He's the one that is worthy of our trust, and we're going to see how trust now is going to be magnified throughout the remainder of this section, 5 through 8. The trust that we have in the Lord is going to answer verse 6, is going to answer verse 7, and it's going to be our answer in verse 8. And in verse 8, the very last word in that translation is securely. And we'll talk about that later on in the week, but that is the same idea of trust. It actually is the same Hebrew root word. That's why I say it's repeated here. So we have this overarching theme of trust. Let's follow it now throughout the remainder of the week. Join me tomorrow. We're going to look at verses 6 and 7 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.